Okay, good afternoon, early evening, everybody. This is Ray Douglas on the Equal Equity Show, and I'd like to welcome our guest, Alexandra Wilson, the Essex barrister. Welcome, Alexandra.
Thank you. Hello, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for making this happen. I know that the world has changed for everyone over the last 8 months. And sure, in your world, in the criminal justice system, nothing's different in there. So thank you for inviting us, responding to our invitation. And what I want to talk about today is about this whole concept of pro-social modeling. Now, like everyone who's invited you on their shows, they've looked at your interviews before, they've gone on Google, they've checked out the book. I'm one of those people who haven't read the book, but I get it. And my first question is, it's not about the incident, and everyone knows what the incident is, because quite often I think as people of color, our story becomes the trauma that we've experienced. But there's a story before that I'm interested and my team are interested in, is how did a young woman of color from Essex become a barrister? And if we can start at the beginning, if that's not too much trouble for you.
Yeah, of course. So my story kind of begins when I was still at school. I went to, just for context, I went to a state school in Essex. I went to a normal comprehensive school until I was 16. And then when I was 16, I changed to a grammar school, like in my local area. And I guess the point that I highlight as my journey to the bar really beginning was when I was 17. Yeah, I was 17, and I was studying for my A-levels, and a really close family friend was killed. He was murdered by two other boys in an area he didn't know. And for me, that was the point in which I decided that I wanted to do something in this sphere. That's the way that I would put it. I decided at that point that, someone so close to me had been murdered for what I could see was only the color of his skin. He'd been in an area that he didn't know, and was stabbed to death by boys who were trying to take revenge for someone having killed their friend. And they saw a black boy they didn't know and killed him. And at the time, I genuinely, I couldn't understand it. I really, really couldn't understand it. And I talk a bit about that in my book, about how over time, I kind of set off on this journey to understand it. I probably never will fully understand it, but it made me realize that there were a lot of other factors at play. These were young men themselves. They were 17, 18. And the thing that confused me most was how anyone could get to that point, of wanting to kill someone they didn't know. Mm. And I realized that it was a part of a much bigger problem. I know, most people will be familiar with seeing the headlines that are so frequently in our newspapers and TVs, black on black crime, gang crime. And for me, it was strange how quickly it was dismissed, that, these cases were treated as though that was just the way things were. And I remember my friend's case was put out there as a mistaken identity case. And even that in and of itself kind of took away actually who he was, and what had happened. So from then I decided I wanted to do something to make a difference. I hadn't exactly decided what it was going to be, but I thought it would probably have something to do with the criminal justice system, because I began to watch similar cases. I would go to court, watch those cases. And then I guess fast forwarding a bit from then, I went to uni. I didn't study law, I studied PPE, but that allowed me to do quite a lot of research into, I looked at race in America. So I looked at some of the issues that the US faced, again, realized that we have a lot of them here. And then after university, decided to do a law conversion. And the bar has been where I feel I can make that impact, where I can start to change some of the narrative.
Okay, so I'm not going to allow you to skip Oxford, right? So your state school in Essex, and for those who don't know, can you explain what a PP is? Because you said you didn't study law.
Yeah, of course. So PP is politics, philosophy, and economics. So it's quite a mixed degree. It's I guess a bit more like some of the US degrees, where you have a wider variety of things to study and you specialize as you go on. And so I ended up specializing in politics and philosophy, and the politics in particular, as I was I kind of briefly touched on, and I know Ray said I can't skip over the stuff. So, you know, when in my second and third year, I found a professor at Oxford who specialised in the politics of race in the US. And for me, you know, Oxford, I had a very mixed experience. And one of the things that I did feel was that my race became a lot more important to me than it had ever before. I guess because I have 3 siblings who are all mixed race like me, but also my cousins, even on my white side, are all mixed race. And then my cousins on my black side are black or mixed race. And so I've grown up in a really mixed, like, family where being mixed race, being black, like, is seen as, you know, just the norm, I guess. I went to schools that were fairly mixed. And so then when I went to Oxford, that was when I became hyper aware of my race. You know, I was the only person in my year who was black. And so that all of a sudden my race felt like something that made me stand out rather than blend in. And so I guess when I was there, I felt like it was kind of missed out. Like, race was not really thought of as an academic thing. Was my experience in the first couple of years. I just felt like my interest in race was very much like, oh, of course you're going to care about race, you're black, rather than this is an academic thing that everyone should care about. And it was only when I found that professor who specialised in it, and he was an older white middle class man, but he of course saw it as an academic subject. And really encouraged me to pursue my interest in that, not just because I'm black, but because it's actually a very important issue that, you know, everyone should care about. And that really transformed my Oxford experience, I would say.
I hear that, and I'm a firm believer when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. That Chinese proverb. And so that opening, as we call it, meeting that individual, was like the intersectionality of law, social justice, philosophy, critical race theory, can we say? Was there an element of that in there? Okay.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So, but once again, how did you get to Oxford? Not how, we know how you applied, but what you aimed high. And for those young listeners who'll be watching this after the session, Oxford, talk to us about it.
Yeah, so I kind of it's kind of a funny story as to why I set my goals on Oxford, set my eyes on Oxford. I was quite a bossy child. And I don't even like the word bossy, but yeah, that was definitely how I was described. Assertive, there we go. I was assertive, I was confident. But I was called bossy all the time. And people used to joke that, you know, or Alex, she likes to tell everyone what to do, you know, she's going to run the country someday. And it kind of became this running joke that, you know, Alex is going to be Prime Minister, Alex is, you know. And I remember being about 15, it was like late secondary school, and I was like, oh, I'm Prime Minister, maybe, you know, maybe that's what I could do. And I remember literally doing a very, very crude, like, Google search, being like, how do you become Prime Minister? I'm pretty sure it was that basic. And looked it up, and I noticed that most of the Prime Ministers had done this degree, politics, philosophy and economics, at Oxford. And I remember thinking to myself, actually, Prime Minister stuff aside, this degree looks fascinating. Like, how, you know, I was always someone that was quite all-rounded, and I didn't know what I wanted to study. I wasn't set on one particular subject. I really liked the sciences and maths, but also really liked English and history and the written subjects. And so it felt for me that I was being asked to pick too early. You know, everyone was like, oh, I want to do maths, I want to do medicine, I want to do, you know, people had decided that clear path, and I just wanted to keep my options open. And that felt like a perfect degree, apart from the fact that, you know, it was super competitive and going to be at Oxford, you know. So I think then I was sort of like, okay, can I, you know, academically, can I do this? And, you know, I had always done well at school, and I told my parents, and I remember my parents sort of being like, okay, you know, you've gone right for the top, okay, you can do it, you can. And I think having my parents' support always made a huge difference. And then, as I said, I applied for a grammar school when I was 16, which my parents actually weren't in favour of. Their view, they're both teachers, and their view was always, you'll do well wherever you go. Like, you can, you know, going to the comprehensive school is going to make you a much more well-rounded individual. You know, you'll mix with a mix of people, and actually, like, if you're going to, like as I said, if you're going to do well, you'll do well regardless. And so it took me just applying myself to the grammar school at 16 and just applying.
You did it yourself?
Yeah, I just applied myself. And I remember telling my parents, oh, you know, they've invited me for an interview, and my parents were like, when did you apply? when was that? And don't get me wrong, my parents are still, they still, you know, they realized that I was serious about it. I really did want to change schools. I think, you know, my school before, behavior management was the key thing, not education. And so I think they appreciated that I wanted to be in an environment where other people wanted to learn, where other people really wanted to do well, and that actually that might, you know, at that stage be better for me. Went to the grammar school, and then actually kind of ironically didn't have a very good experience there. You know, I had this really great vision of grammar school. I thought grammar school was going to be where there were lots of people like me, I guess. I thought that, you know, it would be like a really academic haven, that everyone was super, super keen to learn. We would have all these intellectual conversations in the common room, and that, you know, like it would just be this wonderful dreamlike place. And actually I got there, and I remember on the first day when I met the head of sixth form, her saying, you know, you might have been the best in your school, but you won't be the best here. And I felt that hostility from day one. I was very much treated, you know, I was referred to as one of the externals, like as in external students. And I was referred to as an external by teachers and students. And I always felt that. I always felt very external, that, you know, you went to the bad state school down the road, and like you might have done well in your GCSEs, but it was treated like it was a fluke. That's how I was sort of treated, as though it was, you know, like by chance you did well. And I remember when I said, you know, I want to apply to Oxford, I've found this degree, it seems perfect. I remember my form tutor actually laughed. Like, she laughed when I said that I wanted to. And then at parents' evening, because I obviously didn't bring it up again, I was terrified, other than to ask for a mock interview, and my sixth form offered a mock interview scheme. And they told me that they couldn't offer me one. And various excuses. At first they said they didn't have the teachers, which was strange given that they taught economics and politics. And although they didn't teach philosophy, they taught classics. And so there was more than enough ways they could have put together some kind of interview.
So I'm getting from this, you know, back to the label. We know about the labeling theory, but this bossy Alex thing, right? There's an element of truth in it, right? And his boss is not the right word, but the fact that they didn't have the mock, but you expect now, looking back, they could have created a curriculum or something to prime you. That is powerful. I mean, there's loads of people asking questions on the live, but I will get to that. I mean, so we'll fast forward. You get to the bar, the Essex barrister, right? Because I was thinking before we went live, most people write books called Memoirs of a Black Barrister at the end of their career, right? You've come in the door disrupting. Right, let's be honest. And there's nothing wrong with disrupting, but you've come in the door with like, this is who I am, this is what I'm seeing from the gate, and what we're going to do about it. So let's go to the dichotomy of Essex barrister. Why you chose that handle, but also the book.
Yeah, I think for me it was about taking ownership of a lot of the experiences that I've had. I think that for a long time, whether that was school, the stuff I've already touched on, or whether that was at university, I felt like I was playing someone else's game, that actually, you know, it was dictated to me that I was going to be an outsider. It was dictated to me that you don't fit in. And that was my experience, you know, up until I was 21, 22. And I actually thought, I might be in this career for the rest of my life. You know, like, this genuinely might be my career for the rest of my life. And so if I want to change things, I have to start from the beginning. I can't allow this to be yet another sphere where I feel excluded. And the only way to do that is to take ownership of the fact that I'm different. And actually, maybe that will have a real positive impact on other people who feel different, who feel that, you know, this career is not for people like them, or who are explicitly told that, like I was. And so from day one, I came in and was a bit more confident. You know, confidence grows. Let me not pretend that I came in and was like 100% sure of myself, because of course I wasn't. It's a career where there were so many brilliant minds and so many brilliant people that, of course, I still had insecurities. And again, that's something I talk about in my book. But I definitely was much more of the, I kind of came to the view that actually, if I want to change things, I need to be visible as the sort of person that I would have wanted to see when I was 16, when I was 18. You know, let me be that person so that I can help change the setup of this profession.
I hear that. So I'm an observer. So I probably watched about 3 of your interviews, ranging from Piers Morgan to Represent Radio and something else. Now, in our culture, we call it code switching, but I see that you have the ability in terms of that higher language, enabled to, and you have to obviously working in the world that you work, but also you have the ability to speak to the man them, right? So I've seen that on Represent Radio and everywhere in between, and I see that, and it doesn't matter what color you are, what class you are, but the ability to traverse spaces linguistically, cadence, semantics, vocabulary is an art. I'm gonna bring in a question here. This is from Abby from the National Youth Agency. Says, have you found that you have adapted your speech patterns and code switched from when you went to uni and got involved in your career journey? What's your views on that?
Yeah, I think undoubtedly I have. I think that one thing I kind of like to think in any event is that my voice definitely still changes. It's not gone from one to the other. And I think that's something that I would probably be quite upset by, to be honest. I still have, it's so important where I'm from. I mean, it's clearly important to me. As you said, all my handles are Essex Barrister. And, I think that one of the reasons that's so important to me is because it's so stigmatized. People think of Essex and they think dumb. And that's been a narrative that's been around for a while, that Essex people are less intelligent. People from Essex are less intelligent. I remember at uni getting stick for it. People would mock my accent all the time. But, do I code switch? Of course I do. I work in a job where I'm in a very formal environment a lot of the time. And it's really important that I make sure that everyone understands what I'm saying. I don't think, anyway, I hope not. I don't think I go so far as to sound poncy is probably the word I would use. I don't think I use long words for the sake of using long words. I always try to be clear and speak in a way that everyone can understand. But I definitely will make more of an effort to articulate myself in a more, for example, a more enunciated way in court than when I'm speaking to my friends.
Represent Radio or what?
Radio, exactly.
And I get it. I mean. And I think, there's an etiquette, isn't it, that comes with different spaces. So we have to be able to adapt. So amongst other things now, you've got is it Black Women in Law?
Yeah, Black Women in Law, I sat.
Because, you're spinning these big plates. And then is this a non-profit? What's Black Women in Law?
Yeah, so Black Women in Law is an organisation that I set up earlier this year, basically to fill what I saw as a gap. I think a lot of the work that I try to do is to fill gaps that I see and put things in place that I wish I had. Because there's one thing complaining you didn't have something, but then why not actually change it for the future generation so that the same people don't go through, what you felt you went through. So Black Women in Law, for me, was really important as a junior barrister to provide a space, first of all, where people could talk about issues that they were having. Because let's not overlook that. Sometimes when you're in a job and you are an underrepresented minority, and particularly a Black person, there might be things that are said to you that actually you feel aren't right, but you're not sure they're, and I put this in inverted commas, bad enough to report. Okay. And that was something that I felt a lot. There were comments that were being said to me that made me feel uncomfortable, but I wasn't sure if it was enough, or I just didn't want to report it because I just, it's a job where reputation means everything, and no one wants that reputation of being the whistleblower.
Yeah.
Yes. And so I wanted a space where people could talk about it, because sometimes talking about it really does help. And so that was one of the things for me on a personal level. But then I also saw other gaps. So for example, I was quite lucky. I had 2 really good mentors. They were brilliant, both of them Black men, and they made a huge difference, for me coming into the profession. But I know a lot of people don't have mentors. A lot of people want mentors, but can't find them. They don't know how to start. Where do you go to look for a mentor in a career if you don't know anyone?
Yeah.
And so it's all very well me saying go to events. I think COVID-19 has highlighted more than anything that actually having one source of finding a mentor is not good enough, because events have stopped. So now how are people finding mentors? So again, Black Women in Law was a response to that. It was creating a platform where we now have hundreds of Black women in law who are here willing to give up their time to, you know, the younger generations, those who are aspiring to be in our profession, but also those already in the profession who want to progress in the profession, which is something that hasn't affected me personally yet because I'm still relatively junior, but it will at some point, and it benefits, you know, many of my colleagues that now we're in close contact with Black judges, Black senior people in the profession, and we have those networks to support our work. So for me, that was what Black Women was. It was partly personal and seeing what I needed, but also looking wider at the profession, more widely at the profession, and seeing the gaps and trying to kind of close in them. And also, you know, let me not miss out the fact that Black Men in Law was set up and has done brilliantly. Black Men in Law, you know, has done absolutely brilliantly and was really inspirational for me on the outside. You know, I was looking in sort of thinking, you know, they've done such a good job. Why don't we have one? Like, let's do what we do. And so they were definitely a huge inspiration to me setting that up.
Phenomenal. So the reason why we set up Equal Equity in partnership with the National Relief Agency is, one, is to capacity build Black and practitioners of colour into leadership, management and policy. Now, one of those things that we're looking at is the concept of pro-social modelling. So you got into not just law, but obviously to the bar, and then you've landed and you realise 1% of judges are Black. So I don't know how many of them are female within that Blackness, but what did that? When you first got that statistic, what was your feelings?
It was certainly disappointment, but I can't pretend it was surprise. I think before I came into the profession, I didn't realize how bad it was. You know, I knew that we weren't as well represented, and but that was purely anecdotal. It was during my work experience, going to different courts and just never, ever, ever seeing a Black woman, you know, as a judge, never, not seeing a Black man, not seeing a Black woman. And, you know, I did quite a lot of work experience. I probably overdid it on the work experience side. And I was going I was going to courts in London and Essex where you would expect to see that sort of diversity, and just wasn't seeing it.
Yeah. So
I knew it would be low. Then I surprisingly started looking at the reports, and when I saw, you know, 1%, it did shock me, and it particularly because a lot of the work that I'd done prior to that, you know, the work I spoke about doing in the US and then coming back and looking at the UK version was about incarceration, you know, about imprisonment. And so that was a sort of, I guess, personal interest that I was really fascinated by in relation to race. I was really fascinated by the disparity in incarceration rates for Black people versus their white counterparts. And I knew that, you know, Black people in the UK made up about 12%. Well, I think it's 12% now, but, you know, I knew it was over 10%. And I think the figure at the time that I remember looking was BAME. So they had put us all in this lump together. But it was about a quarter of the prison population were BAME. And I knew a substantial part of that were Black. And so then to hear 1% of judges, for me, it felt like a real, there's such a big difference. Like the power dynamic was just so off. I couldn't articulate what it was that was so frustrating, and I you know, I have better words now, but I remember at the time just thinking, there's something not right here. That the power is distributed in a very uneven way. You've got these people making all the decisions who all come from a certain background, or, you know, we have 1% who are Black, but then the people on the other side, Black people are hugely overrepresented. Why is the power distributed so unfairly? And that was something that continues to upset me, to be honest.
And to speak to my experience, you know, I've worked in approximately 20 prisons. You know, I've managed units in prisons, and the racial trauma that I was witnessing by seeing 80 to 90% of the service users, the inmates in the exercise yard, being of BAME, and politically we'll just use the word BAME because people understand where we're going with this. You know, and act like, I was mentioning to my colleague, have you noticed? And they were a person of colour themselves, and they said, you know what, it just dawned upon me. And to keep seeing that and seeing that and seeing that. So at the very kind of, as you said, at the highest level, you see the disproportionality in terms of inequality, but then also in terms of, you know, those young people who are in there and adults. You know, it's frightening. We're big on pro-social modelling in youth work and anti-oppressive practice, right? so I didn't want to just dive in, but the tipping point after, you know, this journey of you going from Essex, pushing the envelope, challenging authority, challenging the stereotypes, you know, getting people out of their comfort zone, making a ruckus, and then you've got this far now. You got to the bar, you've got the gown, you've got the wig, right? And then you've done the heavy lifting, and now you've reached this place. You turn up to that magistrates court, and I am aware that you didn't have the wig and the gown on that day, but that's clearly the tipping point for you. Can you just revisit that day if you don't mind? Because I'm not, it's racial trauma, and as people of color, we have to manage that, you know, and prepare to say no, I don't want to speak about it. But if you're happy to speak about it, tell us about that day.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that day, as you said, Ray, I didn't have my wig and gown. It was a magistrate's court. We don't wear our wig and gown in the mags. But, you know, I was dressed as I would always be dressed for court. So a black suit. I was carrying my handbag, which actually was too small for my laptop. So you could very clearly see my laptop, you know, hanging out of my bag. And I mention all of that because there were obvious signs that day that I was a legal representative, obvious signs that people looked past. And that's why I mentioned that for context. You know, that day, there were multiple occasions where I was not only dismissed as a lawyer, but actually, and because that's the less important part, is the fact that I was assumed to be a defendant multiple times. You know, when I entered the court building, the security staff said to me that I needed to, they wanted my full name so that they could tick me off of the list of defendants to say that I was there, explain that I'm a barrister. And that security officer did apologize. But then proceeded through court to, once I'd spoken to my client, a member of the public told me not to go into the courtroom and said, you know, only lawyers can go in there, not journalists, which was slightly odd. And, you know, that one is often missed out of some of the stories that when I talk about the incident, I guess because it's a member of the public, but that still adds to the narrative. It's the fact that a member of the public who had no business to be telling anyone what to be doing felt that, you know, she doesn't work there. She doesn't have any business to be telling anyone what they can and can't do, but felt entitled enough to tell me not to go into a certain room. And I think that plays into my experience that day. You know, then going into the courtroom, the magistrates weren't in the room, and just again for context, what normally happens before a hearing, for anyone who's not sure, is we go in to speak to the prosecutor about the case I was defending, and so I went to speak to the prosecutor just to give the prosecutor a heads up as to, you know, whether my client was going to plead guilty, whether they were going to plead not guilty, just so that we can prepare the right thing for court that day. And you go in when the magistrates or the judge are out of the room, so you can have a bit of a discussion just before. So the magistrates were out. I headed into the courtroom, and then another barrister or solicitor, so someone similarly dressed to me sitting in court, told me to wait outside the courtroom, to go back outside and to sign in for my case. Again, I explained I am a barrister, so I'm in here to speak to the prosecutor. And she looked embarrassed, but didn't apologize. And then finally, I started to walk across the courtroom to the prosecutor, and the court clerk, the legal advisor, the person who sits there advising the magistrates on the law, shouted at me to leave the courtroom and told me to wait outside and sign in for my case, and then asked whether I was represented today. And so yet again, I had to explain that I was the representative, that I was there to speak to the prosecutor. And to be honest, I was quite upset by this point. You know, it was the cumulative effect of just having to constantly justify my existence in the courtroom in a way that my colleagues weren't having to. You know, I was seeing white lawyers of different ages, because one of the things that people have said in response is it just because of your age? Well, there were lots of other young lawyers. The magistrates court has a lot of young lawyers because it's the least serious of crime. You know, less serious crimes are dealt with in the magistrates court, but also the early stages of even serious crimes. And so senior practitioners are rarely in the magistrates court. It's normally junior practitioners. So it's quite common to see young people in the magistrates court. Again, you know, is it because you're a woman? Well, the legal clerk and the legal representative who sent me out of the room, both of them were women, and there were women coming in and out of the room. So for me, it was obvious that it was because of the way I looked. I hadn't spoken at that point, you know, otherwise maybe I would put it down to my accent too. But it was just looking at me and thinking, this isn't this person must be a defendant. So yeah, that was my experience that day. I think, just to sort of summarize it, for me, and I really want to emphasize this because I think the way it's been reported has been quite different across different newspapers, different news outlets. So I'm really focusing on the fact that I wasn't recognised to be a lawyer, and that's not the point. And I just really wanted to emphasise that, because the point isn't that I'm sitting here thinking, I've worked so hard, I should be recognised as a lawyer. I mean, don't get me wrong, that is a problem, that we're refusing to acknowledge Black people as lawyers. That is a problem. But that wasn't the point that day. The point is that people assumed I was a defendant, that I was attending because I was involved in criminal activity or alleged to be involved in criminal activity. And that's because of how over-criminalised Black people are. And that's the point. I could have been anyone. I could have been a member of the public. And my point would still stand, that it shouldn't be that when we see Black people, we automatically see criminality or alleged criminality. Because how can I tell my clients that we've got a fair justice system if from every stage that, we see a Black person and assume criminality? That's not right. And one of those people was a legal advisor who would be in conjunction, in talks with people making very important decisions. So I think I just wanted to emphasize, for me, what I saw the main point of that day as being. And of course, everyone can have their own interpretations of what they think is important, but that was what was important for me.
Definitely, and I hear that, and I believe there was form for that as well. It wasn't the first time there was, and I don't like this word microaggressions, because they're macroaggressions where you've been counsel for someone and someone's asking, because they're not, that you're the person of color, they assuming that your client is the counsel, right?
Yes, and that's happened quite a lot of times, to be honest. And that's not even in just the criminal courts. I do family work too, and that happens a lot in the family courts. That if I often represent women, and often there'll be white women, and the amount of times that the usher has gone over to my white female client and said, is your client here? Can you sign your client in? Are you ready to speak to the other side? Are you ready for the judge? And my client always kind of looks at me, oh, are we ready? And I have to say, I'm the barrister, actually, and people are normally apologetic, but it's just so problematic that there is that assumption. And that's where I do think, training can make a big difference, because why even make the assumption? It's a dangerous game to play. Why even risk offending people? Why not just ask? Sorry, can I check who's the barrister?
Right.
It's reframing the way you ask those sort of things.
Definitely. So there's that beautiful saying, when you get up there, don't forget to throw the ladder down for the next set of people coming up. And before, what I'd like to do, because this work that we're doing in Equal Equity with the National Youth Agency is to capacity build youth practitioners, so we can be better, not just practitioners in a sector that has equality, but also that we can support the young people that we work with, that we serve, the communities that we serve. And I've seen that you've done with this, just very briefly, this one case at a time that you're involved in. So you've got the Black women in law, you've got your day job, you've got all these press and lives that you're doing, and then this one case at a time. Can we touch upon that? Because what I'm going to do after this is bring in some young people, because it's their voice at the center of all this, to have a conversation with you. But what is One Case at a Time?
So One Case at a Time is an organisation that we've set up, and it's called, the reason I say organisation, that was intentionally at the moment, is we're registering as a charity. At the moment, we're in the process of registering. It takes quite a long time, so it hopefully will be a charity, a registered charity. But at the moment, it's an organisation, and the goal is to assist disenfranchised minorities, particularly Black people, and we have set that out in their experiences through the criminal justice, through the justice system. I think anecdotally, it's set up by 4 lawyers, and we're all Black, and we felt that there were, and this is backed up by statistics everywhere, but and the reason I focus on anecdotally is because we're doing the day job every single day, and we felt that many of our Black clients, but also other minority group clients as well, but particularly Black people, were being disadvantaged in the system by things that were perhaps outside of the scope of the judges. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So, for example, my experience in the family courts was that, like, we know Black people are disproportionately affected by poverty. Okay, and this is where I say statistics back it up, right? You can go and Google those statistics, but I know, for example, in London, Black people are more likely to live in the most deprived neighbourhoods in London and the boroughs, of course, in London. But we were seeing that poverty was that poverty meant that there were disproportionate outcomes. So, for example, if you want to see your child and the court feel that you need to have supervised contact in a contact centre first, as opposed to just going and having, unsupervised time with your child, the court will often order for you to attend a contact centre, which costs money. Now, if you don't have that money to go and attend that contact centre, you can't progress with your case.
Yeah.
And so what I was finding is that there were a lot of parents, or particularly fathers, who were just not seeing their children. Yeah. And, there's this narrative around absent Black fathers. And I have very strong views on that, given that we massively over criminalize Black men and put them in prison at disproportionate rates. So how anyone can criticize the Black community for that is beyond me. But here was another clear example that actually, it felt like the system was putting an unachievable benchmark there. It was saying, you need to pay for these sessions. If you can't progress. But we know you don't have any money. Yeah. It was sort of find money. And
let's be clear, that's like £150, £250 per contact, right?
Exactly.
If you want to see, as a father, if you wanted to see, or a mother, if you wanted to see your child twice, 3 times a month, £700 maybe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's often an administrative fee. Often the court will say, because mum might not have money either, and so what they might say is you also have to pay mum's travel to drop the kids at the contact centre. And so it ends up being so expensive. And that, that's just one example that I felt that I could see. And I was like, it was so frustrating to sit there with a client and explain to them that if they can't get this money together, we are really going to struggle to move forward in this case. And you can imagine how heartbreaking that is for any parent, explaining that to the court, explain to the court that they have no money, and the court sort of saying our hands are tied because, we've had recommendations from the experts to say that it needs to start supervised. So where can we go from here? And so what one case at a time would do in that scenario would be providing that financial assistance to that person. So covering the cost of the contact centre and the travel, smoothing out the process, being able to step in those circumstances and support people so that their case can progress, and we can see the same in criminal spheres, like people who can't afford to attend court, and then you get a further conviction for not attending, failure to surrender.
It sounds like the bail bonds, right, in the US. You can't afford it, you hold the charge. Interesting. I'm gonna I want to ask you this because we're going to bring in some young people now.
Yeah.
This is from Lee Middleton, who's actually the chief executive of the National Youth Agency. He said, "What advice would you have the youth sector in empowering and raising the volume of Black voices in our spaces?"
So I guess it depends. Actually, I'll address both. I was going to say, in terms of Black voices, are we talking about the youth themselves, or?
Yeah, I think both. It's not singular. The issue's not singular.
Yeah, I think in terms of the youth themselves, I think it's really important to actually not be shy in saying we want to hear Black voices. Sometimes I think there's been I've certainly experienced it. There's been a tendency in the last few years to sort of sit a bit on the fence and collect data under this BAME term, BAME. And I know Ray touched on it earlier. We use it because everyone recognises what it means. But actually, it's really important that we do separate those voices out, because sometimes you'll see differences in experiences. You might see that actually Black people are not going through the same thing as Asian people. And that doesn't mean that any's necessarily worse than the other, but it's really important to understand the nuance between groups, because, for example, Black people might be being criminalized in a different way to Asian people, just because of the narrative that. So, for example, I know the Met Police's gang matrix. 78% of people on that gang matrix are Black. 78%. Now, that's obviously going to mean that Black people are being treated differently by the Metropolitan Police to Asian people, because there's such a huge assumption that Black people belong in gangs. Now, that doesn't mean that doesn't exist at all for Asian people, because actually, anecdotally, I think it does. but there's clearly some difference there. So I think don't be afraid to actually say what we want to hear are Black voices.
Yeah,
I think that's really key. I think in terms of the I guess the professional side of things, it's making sure you engage with other agencies, you know, making sure that you speak to other people on the ground. I mean, obviously with it sounds like you guys have a first-hand, you know, you literally have an open door with the youth, but also make sure you're speaking to people like practitioners who are, you know, these issues are not completely separate. The sort of work that I'm doing on a daily basis in terms of representing a lot of these people clearly ties into the work you're doing and kind of building young people up and empowering them. So try and engage with different agencies. That would be my recommendation, to have a roundtable, literally bring people in who are working on the different fronts, you know, whether it's the lawyers who are representing the kids, the social workers, let's not ignore the fact that being a looked after child has a huge impact. Well, first of all, because so many Black and other ethnic minority groups are overrepresented in the care system.
So you're saying a more multi-agency approach?
I think so. I think it's really important. I think to get the people's voices properly heard, I do think is really important.
Which is a great segue. I'm going to invite in two young ladies. Now, in my work, a lot of the time, historically in conferences, right, there's all this policy and conversations done, and at the end, you know, there's just this moment where they bring out the local inner city young people, and they'll spit some bars or they'll do something like that. But this is different today. We're going to bring in some young people, actually, Brooklyn Lee, who are actually studying criminal psychology. So these are, you know, and I think it's important to hear their voices. Hi there, Lee, Brooklyn. Can you hear us? Okay. I mean, have you got any questions for Alexandra?
We did. Okay. My first question is, what is it like being a Black woman in the criminal justice system?
Frustrating is the honest answer. I think it can feel very frustrating at times because I don't think I'll ever get used to the feeling of going into the court building, particularly the youth court, and just seeing so many young Black kids. And I know it affects me in a different way to how it affects my white colleagues. I know it does. You know, I've had those conversations even with my white colleagues who I would consider allies, you know, people that do genuinely care, people that will have that conversation with me and say, you know, today I was in court and it was hugely overrepresented and this is clearly a problem. It just doesn't affect them in the personal way that it does affect me. You know, when I see those kids, I see my nephews, my brothers, my friends, like my family, whereas when my colleagues see them, they do still see people, but just not in the same personal way. And it's something that I still find really, really difficult. Just because it's the disparity. I think that's why I find it so hard. It's the huge disparity. You know, of course there are always going to be clients, and there are always going to be clients from a mix of backgrounds, but it's just seeing such a huge. I remember there was about a year ago, I went into a youth court, and there were, I think it was like 33 cases listed in one courtroom that day, and every single child, I'm not exaggerating, every single child was Black or mixed race, every single one. And so there was more than a classroom of kids, right? 33 kids. I mean, actually, I think there were about 33 in my state school. Like, we used to oversubscribe, but you know, squeeze every kid in. But you know, that many children sitting outside courtroom, some with their mums, some by themselves, some with social work. Like, that was really hard for me to process. I remember having to take a moment. So yeah, I think it can be quite frustrating.
Next question.
Okay, so you mentioned about anti-racist training.
Clearly, you've been watching.
I don't even know if they can hear me. Yeah. Do you think that they'll be implemented anytime soon, and that there'll be a change in the criminal justice system regarding like discrimination against Black people?
Whether or not there'll be anti-racist training, I don't know. I hope to see more anti-racist training, I still think there's this fear of what anti-racist actually means. I think that a lot of like government bodies and they still see anti-racist as like a political thing, which is not. That is not what. It's not at all political. There's nothing political about it. All it's saying is, you know, if you're not actively tackling racism, then you're a part of it, right? And I think once there's an appreciation for that, then hopefully the training will look more anti-racist. I still think at the moment, if I'm being honest, we're still going to be. I think the government and the civil service, I think that the training that they're going to use is still going to be unconscious bias training, you know, under that heading of unconscious bias, which personally, I don't think is good enough. I mean,
there's a queue for that one. There's a queue for that one. We're not into that.
No, I just think unconscious bias is actually just a bit. Half the time, it's not unconscious. Also, I mean, unconscious, like, well, they're asleep. It doesn't make any sense. Like, what is unconscious about it? Like, I just think it's a really lazy way out. And yeah, I'm not. But I think it's the safer word for now. You know, people have become a bit more comfortable with saying, "Oh, it's my unconscious bias." Obviously, I'm not racist. Like, you know, it's unconsciously. I think that X, Y, Z. And it makes people feel more comfortable with having the race conversation, when actually I don't think we're here to create comfort. That's not, you know, actually, like, we've been keeping the conversations too comfortable for too long. Actually, there needs to be some discomfort, because we're feeling it as, you know, as people who are Black, Asian, mixed race, from any other ethnic minority group, we're feeling the discomfort. Why should our discomfort be there so that we can have comfortable conversations? Actually, like, it's not good enough anymore. And so personally, I would like to see that shift, but I would be lying to you if I said that I was hopeful that it was going to happen now. I think there's still more work to be done. But
I'm sure you'd agree, though, 2020 has been an interesting year around the conversations about anti-racism. And, you know, we value the partnership that we're doing with the NYA, because it's having those uncomfortable conversations. And we're all clear, whatever ethnicity we are, that there's going to be some uncomfortable seat shuffling moments around this. Ladies, any more questions? Because I know you're both studying, let me correct me if I'm wrong, you're both studying clinical psychology at Derby University.
Criminal psychology.
Criminal psychology. What year are you in?
Third year.
Third year. Okay, so any more questions for Alexandra?
Yeah, how often do you see injustices, like, in your line of work?
That is a really good question.
If you can mute your mics, please, ladies. Sorry, if you mute your phones or your mics, just so to avoid the feedback. Sorry, go ahead, Alexandra.
Thank you. I would say that it depends. You know, on small injustices all the time, genuinely all the time. Big injustices less often. I'm pleased to say. You know, the big injustices, the sort that you're going to take a case and appeal it because there's such a huge injustice, I see much less often, which as I say, it doesn't mean they don't happen. I want to be very clear, just because I don't go through it doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but my experience is that I see less of those. But in terms of the small injustices, I see them quite a lot. So for example, just even the way that people are treated in the courtroom. You know, I had a client the other day, young Black boy, he's been charged with possession of drugs with intent to supply it to other people, so dealing. And it was his first hearing. He was terrified. Like, he's never been in trouble before, genuinely terrified. You know, I was in conference with him. He was sweating, like, you know, he's pleading not guilty, maintains he hasn't done anything. Very, very nervous. Just to be, you know, and it's terrifying for everyone. Like, honestly, I think it's having not even been through it myself, but seeing people go through it all the time, why would it not be terrifying? You know, you're before people you've never met before, someone who's going to represent your interests who you've never met before, but also someone who's going to decide on the outcome of your freedom, you know, who you've never met before, who doesn't know you. And, you know, someone's got about half an hour to explain all the things about you, and try and persuade a judge or a jury or magistrates one way or the other. So understandably terrifying. Anyway, we went into his first hearing. It was a fairly administrative hearing. And the way that the magistrate spoke to him, you know, it was the beginning of the hearing. He had to stand up, identify himself. And so the court clerk had said, "Oh, can you stand up, please?" And he was standing up, and the magistrate literally shouted, "I said stand up." And it was just so uncalled for. He was standing up. I was next to him, well, you know, socially distanced, but you know, he literally was standing up. And I stood up and said, he is standing up. She was like, "Well, he'll stand up more quickly because, you know, we're starting the case." And it was just, all he'd done is walk into the room. And for me, that felt like such a huge injustice. And I had actually sat through the case before, which was, I have no idea what the offence was because I'd sat through the end of it. But the magistrate was perfectly lovely to the person before, who was like a middle class, like white man, but essentially. And I say middle class, and of course I don't know his personal circumstance. Well, I do actually, because he was ordered to pay costs. And so at the end, they were talking about, you know, his job and stuff. And so that seeing that just before my case, and then seeing my client, who was just a young black boy, like who was of relatively, you know, little means, being spoken to in such a different way when he hadn't even said much, that felt like an injustice. And that happens all the time. Like, to be honest, that sort of thing happens a lot. And it really just makes people feel more intimidated, more scared, more nervous. And also it makes it feel like the system's not fair, because even being treated differently in court is going to have an impact on, you know, someone's well-being. You guys are the criminal psychologists. I'm sure you know more than me on this, but you know, it's going to affect the way people act, the things people say, their demeanor, the way that how much trust they have in the system ultimately. And so those sort of injustices, yeah, I would say happen fairly often.
So do you, I mean, I'm going to, because I know you know, your time is precious. Do you have any parting advice for them, and why they're on the screen, why they're called Undisclosed Voices of Black Girls? Because they actually, you have a podcast, right? Yeah, okay, capturing the experiences of the future criminal psychologists of the. So, do you have any parting advice for these young, great people? I'm gonna mute your mic so you can hear it.
I would say that my number one piece of advice, and so this will be in your profession, it's for my profession, is find yourself mentors. Like, it makes such a big difference to have someone in the profession, A, who you can go to for advice, but B, who's been through it before you have. You know, it's very tempting when you're new, when you're enthusiastic, to think, I can just go and get it. I can do this. Like, I know the ropes. Like, I'll be able to figure it out. I'm sure I'll be great. Don't be too, you know, don't be overconfident with it. Confidence is a brilliant thing, you know, and that's coming from someone whose mum would probably describe them as overconfident. But, you know, I think that it's actually really important to know your own limits, like know where you have to seek advice from other people, know where you need that guidance, because you never want the reason for you to have not succeeded to be because you were too stubborn or too proud to know where your limit was. And that's something that's really, really helped me, you know, and I think that there are so many people that I can call on who are a lot more established than me, have done it a lot longer than I have, you know, have a lot more experience. And actually, there will be times where I don't know what I'm about to do, or I'm just struggling. I'm a bit like, actually, this is something I haven't come across before. And I can just call that person up and say, this is a situation. What would you do in this situation? And of course, it's down to your own discretion. You still, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying follow blindly in, you know, any of your mentors, but it's so helpful in terms of success more generally, is to find yourself people that you look up to. Yeah, that would be
like a good youth worker to me. That description there just sounds like a good youth worker, which fits in perfectly with today's session. Alexandra, I'd like to thank you on behalf of Equal Equity, Undisclosed Voices of Black Girls, and the National Youth Agency for making this happen. I think she was saying you might want to ask to be a mentor, but I don't know. I'm just talking to the girls here. I don't know. I heard something in there. All the best with your career, and I am going to read your book. But I see that you're doing the work, and you know, already from the very jump, you're putting the ladder back down for those coming up. We'd like to say thank you once again, and all those watching, thank you for your time. This is Ray Douglas, the Equal Equity Show. Peace.
Thank you, Ray.